Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Loga. Where is Loga? You were in the back before, and then I'm like, he's gone. Okay. Loga is the head of our informatics and compliance services at Zippo. He's been with us since the beginning, which in my presentation earlier, I said we've been around for 13 years, but he's been with Zippo 14 years. So I take it back. Zippo's been around for 14 years. Loga is one of the original. He's a thought leader in digital transformation and championing GxP compliance through innovation data solutions. He's passionate about bridging the gap between digital informatics and the regulatory framework. He's focused on harnessing the power of AI and ML, of course, that's been our theme today, to enable engineers to deliver compliant, cutting-edge solutions. So today he'll be talking about the use of AI and GMP. Thank you, Loga.
Thank you, Margaret. I'll try my best to keep the session as interactive as possible. I know I'm also standing between the session and the drinks. So before I talk about artificial intelligence and GMP, I want to spend some time to talk about how the regulatory landscape for AI looks like across the globe, right? So I got this nice presentation or nice slide summarizing how the different regulations look across the globe. So if anybody takes a look at it, the very first thought that would come is, wow, we have a lot of regulations on AI. Looks like every country is heading towards it. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Most of the regulations that you see here are still a draft or a policy or a guidance or more of a paper rather than a standardized regulations or a procedure that you would have to follow, except the Europe. Europe has passed EU AI Act. Most of you would have known about that. It went effective last August 2024, primarily focusing around AI safety, eliminating bias, how can you protect some level of data information and all of that. There is also a lot of pushback on that, including the France president who openly said it's going to kill the innovation, right? And there are a lot of talks going on about how much of those acts would really be applied to the general public or to the technology companies. That's where it is. So in terms of the countries, if we have to quickly glance through where each of the countries stands, US is still putting together some of the draft policies and guidance. And in 2023, President Biden signed an AI Act. Again, it was more of a white paper or a bill of rights that what US is thinking. Of course, with the current political environment, with the change in government, all those is going to change. So we'll have to wait and see how that is going to impact the industry, specifically around AI. Canada also published a draft act, and then they clearly said it's a draft, and still there are no updates or revisions made to that yet. UK again is still working on a very similar structure, still putting together some policies. China published some of the guidances, and India is still looking into it. So if we see in terms of holistically where each of the countries stands, Europe seems to be a little advanced with certain level of regulations, followed by US and Canada, and UK and India are still in the process of putting together some policies and guidances. So let's go deeper into AI, ML, and GMP, right? I think Nara and Chetan covered a lot of use cases around where they have been using, right? I'm trying to summarize some of those here. The primary area that I see is lab process automation and QC data review. That seems to be a very critical piece where everybody is trying to leverage AI in certain fashion. I think we looked at about automating some of the data review process, converting some of the paper copies into electronic formats. There are also one interesting use case that I found is automating some of the testing process that would happen in the QC lab. For example, one of the last pharma that we worked with, they automated some of the QC raw material testing process. And most of you would know, as part of raw material testing process, We do test all the raw materials that comes into the facility, look out for any viral or bacterial or any specific contamination. And as part of that, you would get a lot of images. Now, instead of an analyst or a scientist manually reviewing and looking observations for the viral contamination, the ML model, which is a vision-based model, would look at the images and identify the contamination. That's going to save a lot of time. This way, two analysts would actually do check for the contamination. Now, at least one of that could be eliminated with the help of AI. There are a lot of other use cases around increasing efficiency and throughput in terms of predictive analysis, determining the risks and any contaminations possibilities, any failures ahead based on the past data and what type of process parameters are used. How can I optimize those in order to gain efficiency? Those are some of the areas that we see a lot of AI to be still in the exploratory stages. And visualization and reporting, definitely, I think we all know AI helps with reading, especially Gen AI, helps with reading a lot of documents and be able to give you a summary, be able to create some reporting documents that you would have to submit. The other area is regulatory intelligence. Look out for any regulatory updates across the globe, especially if you have facilities where you are operating across different countries, then the ML model that could focus on regulatory intelligence could come in very handy. So the big question that I wanted to ask everyone today is, are we there yet to take AI into a regulatory landscape without having to have a human intervention, right? How many of you have seen any of this movie, The M3GAN or Subservience? Okay, I could see some of the few hands. So both of the movies are very similar in fashion. There is a advanced AI, could be a toy or a maid that helps with certain functions. They bring it to the home to help with the kid in M3GAN case, where in Subservience, basically to do household chores. And then the AI takes over, right? The typical Hollywood movie where it would start killing people, and then we have a hero who would protect, and say the same story follows. But when I watched both of the movie, the interesting thing I felt is, okay, this is too much. I don't think we are going to get there right yet. I don't think the industry is there yet. Probably Hollywood has usual imagination, and it's an imagination type of movie. I watched Subservience, interestingly, on the Thanksgiving break. That's when it got released on Netflix. And coincidentally, I read a paper in the first week of December, which was shocking to me. I don't know how many of you read this paper from Apollo Research, which talks about how the ML model is actually able to learn itself, and then how it is able to hide, lie, and predict, and then confuse, and then change things how it is required, right? So what happened, how they conducted the research is basically they looked at some of the frontier models. They tried to set a key goal. The one of the goal that they set to the model is, no matter what happens, you have to execute these set of different tasks. That is the goal that they set to the ML model. So it got started learning on its own. It did not follow any of the guidances that were set during the development or the operating range in which the ML model was set. It started behaving based on the just one thing, the goal that was set to the ML model. So which means the model is able to adapt itself, which in technical terms, they call it as scheming, right? So it is able to adapt, learn, move forward. And then when they asked, why did you do this? It started giving responses. The model started giving responses, basically hiding the truth on how it was manipulating those answers, which was very scary to read. There is still a lot of research going on to follow to understand how this can be controlled, how some safety mechanisms can be put. So with that, I think Chetan and Nara, both of them beautifully mentioned about keeping human in the loop, which is nothing but augmented intelligence, right? So we all talk about artificial intelligence, but the biggest question is, are we there to keep artificial intelligence in a regulated space? Should we be talking more about augmented intelligence? What I mean by augmented intelligence is taking the help from both, leveraging the technology, use the technological advancements, at the same time keeping human in the loop, to be able to have the human make the decisions instead of giving it to the ML model or any AI. So the system would still generate the output. It would give you some level of guidance, but it would not directly go into the subsequent system or it would not directly make the decisions. Rather, the human in the loop would process the output from the AI or ML, understand, accept, agree before it's passed on to the subsequent system. I think Chetan was explaining about the use case, right, where the QA and their group agreed on keeping human in the loop, not eliminating both the reviewers, rather keeping one reviewer at least in the space where other reviewer is replaced with the ML model. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So why is keeping human in the loop very, very necessary? The number one reason, there is completely lack of guidance and process in the space. Still, the industry is trying to understand how each of this could create an impact. What type of regulations do we have to follow? There are a lot of unknowns that we are talking about. Plus, the impact of the unknowns, given that GMP is a very critical space, it's going to directly impact the product quality, directly going to impact the patient safety. Can I not just give the decision to AI to make the decision, rather keep it within the human, the final decision within the human, so that we don't impact the patient safety directly? And there is a lot of lack of knowledge, right? The technical team does not understand the regulatory space, the technical environment in which they operate. They don't understand the patient safety attributes or the regulatory requirements, whereas the quality team may not understand the technical requirements. So there is a lot of knowledge gap that have to be addressed before we can say that AI can make decisions and we'll be able to move on. So when we implement AI, ML, and GMP, so I know that the regulations are still evolving, it's still going to come. So we decided to keep human in the loop. But what are all the different things can I consider or should I consider when I implement AI, ML? There are 4 different key personas. If you touch any of the system or data or anything that you try to automate in the context of AI, ML, I see there are 4 different personas. The number one being the data engineers. I think we spoke about that during the panel discussion as well, right? So there is a lot of young, energetic people that are coming into the market with a lot of ideas, with the expertise in Python and other things that we discussed about. But they don't understand the world of pharmaceutical sciences. Not every data engineer that I see works in the pharma space has no prior pharma experience either, right? So they need to be trained on how the pharma industry works, how the product safety, why is product safety, patient safety is very important, what type of industry that they are working with. That is one side. And to the next side, I have the QA team who understands the process very well, who understand the pharmaceutical environment very well, who understands the regulations very well, but they lack the technical expertise, right? We wanted to keep human in the loop, but it cannot be like you need AI and you have to do everything again manually. That's not going to make sense. You have to come into the center point, right? How can I reach the center point? I can only reach that only when I convince the QA or only when I train the QA to help them understand what we are talking about. Lot of technical terms are thrown at people, right? I come from a compliance background. I'm not a technical guy. So when I sat with one of the large pharma trying to help them on implementing their AI process documents, when I was interviewing the data engineers, they were throwing at several terminologies, synthetic data, data leakage, so many things. It took a lot of time for me to read and understand that. That knowledge gap should not exist between your own group, data engineers and QA. You need to enable your QA, train them, tell them, explain them, make them understand how this ML model works. Transparency and explainability is very, very important for you to be successful when you use AI, ML, and GMP. And there are 2 other personas, IT system owners or the IT managers and directors who wants to prove efficiency, who wants to show some level of progress in terms of adopting AI and technology. And you need to understand, explain them as well, make them understand what is possible and what is not. And then you have the business group. Like one of the business users, when I was interviewing for the same engagement that I'm talking about, the very first question that they asked is, okay, you're trying to build an ML model. Am I going to lose my job? Are you going to steal that away from me with the ML model? So the moment you don't explain them what you are trying to do, if you just blindly tell them that I'm going to use ML models, it's not going to work. Remember, they are the ones who need to give you the right data, They are the ones who have to tell what their business process is, and both of them are very, very critical for you to be successful when implementing an ML model. So make them understand that you are trying to help their job easier and not replace their job with the ML model. At least not right now. We are not there in the stage yet, definitely. So now we discussed about the 4 personas and how can we handle that. How does the regulatory landscape look? I know it's still evolving, it's still coming up. So already we have a lot of regulations. If you see, we have computer system validation assurance, we have 210, 211 GMP requirements, we have data integrity requirements, we have part 11 requirements, and now to the PI, the GMLP or good machine learning practices comes into the picture. It is not an actual regulation yet, but it is definitely a process that you would have to follow if you are implementing AI in a regulated environment. What do I mean by GMLP is, so AI is very different compared to a traditional computer system. If you look at computer system, you have some level of control when you do testing and validation. You could give input, you could get an output, you could validate, test, and do a lot of things. At least you know what happens. Unfortunately, that's not the case with AI. Lot of the things happens during development. The AI is going to behave based on how you develop, how you train those ML models, and both of that happens and relies with the data engineers who takes majority of the piece. So come up with a good machine learning practices that talks about what are all the development guidelines and the process that each of these developers would have to follow. Say, for example, label your data. Make sure that you use different data for training, testing, and different purposes. Talk about transparency. Talk about explainability. Talk about the level of data volume that you are going to use at each of the phase and how are they going to generate it. Are they going to use any synthetic data for testing? How each of this is going to happen. Try to explain all of this as part of your GMLP process and make use of it. So holistically, how can I incorporate all of this into my quality framework? Most of the QA professionals or anybody in GMP would have seen the structure where it starts with the policy, responsibility, change management, process document. We talks about different things. Think about when you go for AI, how can I incorporate each of the unique elements pertaining to AI into each of these blocks that we are talking about? Say, for example, how are you going to maintain the AI ML infrastructure? Infrastructure is very, very critical component with AI. How are you going to maintain that? How are you going to maintain the versioning of each of these ML models? Even those are very, very critical. Right? How are you going to maintain each of those? Talk about the GMLP guidance, process documents. What is the process that you're going to follow by involving the ML model into the picture? I think someone asked a question about the SOP would say that should you just go and check the ChatGPT, right? Think about it, how the business is going to gain the ML model. So if you're going to deploy an ML model in GMP, obviously your SOPs needs to be updated. And the users may not even be running the ML model. Someone else could be running it for you. So you need to bring them under the SOP guidance and then explain what are the process they need to follow. Think about those angles and try to document it. And we spoke about resources and how they have to be cross-trained. The data engineers and the QA team would have to get cross-trained on both the sides to address the gap on technical as well as the regulations. And performance monitoring and fine-tuning is very, very critical piece in ML model. So once you deploy, you have to continuously monitor it to understand what is the efficiency in which the model is operating. Do I have to continuously tune it in order to get that better? Can I identify false positive, false negative? Those control mechanisms would have to be defined for each of the model that you are deploying. You cannot holistically say this is what I'm going to follow because it's going to differ based on every model that you try to use. If it is an LLM, the process is different. If it's an image-based model, it's going to be different. So for each of the ML model that you deploy in a GMP environment, think of those attributes and try to write the SOPs. So once you have all of this defined, even though there is a lack of guidance, there is a lack of regulations that we are talking about, at least we are doing our due diligence to make sure that the ML model could be used in a certain way in a regulated GMP environment. I would like to conclude today's session with some of the key takeaways that came from the Paris AI Summit, right? So France hosted this AI Summit and India co-chaired it, and it happened Monday and Tuesday of this week. A couple of things, I was closely following it since I work predominantly in the AI space right now. Some of those were really concerning because I think I thought Europe is ahead of putting regulations in terms of bringing some level of guidance and some level of control, but looks like they are trying to take that back. They're trying to ease some of the guidances to allow more technology, more things to come into the picture. And 60 of the countries signed the international agreement, which spoke about security and trustworthy. And unfortunately, US and UK denied it, and they said they are not going to sign it because US feels that any regulations that are going to come is going to kill the technological innovation, right? I listened to some of the talk by the different prime ministers and presidents who they spoke in the conference, right? One theme that I could see is everybody wants to be part of a pie for the AI opportunity. Everybody wants to have the technological advancements, and nobody is thinking really about the AI safety, unfortunately. So it's like everybody wants to bring in the AI opportunity, and safety, let's not worry about it. We'll take care about it later. So that's the direction at least next couple of years are going to be. But with whatever we discussed, at least given that we are operating in a regulated industry, it's important we do our due diligence. Thank you. Questions?
Very nice, very topical presentation, very current. So I think where all the data that are emanating and some of the machine learning algorithms, I think where they will help, not today, but in the future, is predictive analytics to shorten clinical trial duration. So as you know, FDA is very conservative. They like hard endpoints, death, dialysis, rehospitalization, stuff like that. But with more and more data coming out and our ability to look at patterns, I think what will happen in the future is that patients in clinical trials will not need to reach an endpoint. Mm-hmm. Within the first few days or weeks, you can profile what the drug is doing to them. Mm-hmm. And I think there'll be enough data to make a prediction that this person will or will not reach that endpoint. And then approvals may be given or denied. So I think that's where the field will go, at least in terms of clinical trials.
Definitely. Predictive analysis is definitely going to take a larger space because I think FDA finally agreed to use some of the predictive analysis models as part of the clinical trials. And they don't even have to conduct certain type of tests in the animal studies if they are able to establish and explain the predictive analysis models. So it'll be cool to see how people are trying to use it in the real world and how it's going to impact. Any question? Any other question?
Any other question?
Thank you.
Wait, we have one.
Okay.
He's not thirsty.
So you gave examples from those movies, yeah? And machine learning or AI, we talk about hallucination and iterative stuff, especially custom stuff. If it's the same output, AI functions better, right? Mm-hmm. But when we want AI to act based on the situation and think about it, and then issues start. So we talk about data integration and FDA regulations and overall regulations around that. How do we validate those systems?
So you're asking about validating an ML model?
Yeah, if it's not fully reliable and then we just rely on its output, if we don't control it, otherwise you need to introduce another human or another process step for this. And how do we validate those systems when while we are doing data integration or when FDA, other regulations come? Well, this is what AI is giving me versus system is totally validated and the output is consistent or sustainable.
So ML validation itself is a long topic. So I'll try to answer as much as possible in few words. One thing that you have to consider is again a risk, right? What happens if this ML model breaks? What is the type of risk that I'm talking about? And do I have a risk identification process in place? That's where the human in loop is coming in. If I have subsequent identifications, then the level of validation and the ML model could be very slim. You don't have to do stringent, right? Second thing, what type of ML model are we talking about? The example that I gave, an vision-based ML model, there are a lot of vision-based ML models that exist as a medical device, which is being reviewed and approved by the FDA. So that way you have some level of precedence on what happens with the image-based models, right? So you have some level of control there. You could leverage all of that and explain what happens with that. But if you're going to use a fancy LLM or a Gen AI and other things, it's going to complicate more. Then the validation is going to be very, very difficult. ISPE published a very good guidance on how you could validate it. One of the key things that they say is look out for two things, right? One, how much is the ML going to replace the human factor? That is going to be one. And second, is it a static model or a dynamic model? Is it going to learn by itself, adapt and change? Or can you lock it down for certain parameters? Can you take some level of control? Most of the, or every model that I have come across in a regulated space is more in this category, more on a static category where we are not letting the ML model to automatically learn, adapt and change. Rather, have the human intervention, data engineer intervention still exist. All of this is going to determine the level of validation that we are talking about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.